I didn't mean to start a war. I swear I didn't. I just wanted to make him hurt the way he made me hurt. To see that flicker of regret in his eyes when he realized I could move on without him. That he wasn't the only man in the room I could make fall to his knees with a single look. I didn't come here to cause chaos or rewrite the trajectory of my life in one impulsive act. But that's exactly what I did the night I kissed a stranger, whose name would later make men flinch and women whisper. The club was too loud, the kind of place where the bass vibrated through your bones and the air reeked of cheap perfume and spilled liquor. My friends had dragged me out, insisting that dancing and tequila were the only cures for heartbreak, and I had almost believed them until I saw him. Liam, my ex, the man who swore I was everything he ever wanted, the one who promised he'd never look at another woman the way he looked at me. And yet there he was, laughing too loudly, his hand on someone else's waist, his mouth close to her ear like he used to do to mine when he wanted to make me blush. For a moment, I froze. The room tilted, like the air had been sucked out of it, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own pulse in my ears. I wanted to turn away, to pretend I didn't care, but I felt that familiar burn rising in my chest, the mixture of humiliation, jealousy, and grief that tastes like blood and heartbreak all at once. I reached for another drink, swallowed it too fast, and before I knew what I was doing, I was walking straight toward him. Not because I wanted him back, God, no, but because I wanted him to see that I could be wanted too. That's when I saw him. Leaning against the bar, a glass of dark whiskey in his hand, a man watched the crowd with a kind of stillness that didn't belong here. Everyone else was moving, swaying, laughing, shouting, but he stood perfectly still, like the eye of a storm. He wasn't dressed like the others either. No flashy clothes or loud cologne, just a perfectly tailored black suit that looked like it was sewn directly onto his skin. His hair was dark, his jaw sharp, and his eyes, God, his eyes. They were the color of midnight when the moon hides behind clouds, cold and endless and alive with something dangerous. And maybe it was the alcohol, or the heartbreak, or that deep, self-destructive streak I've always tried to ignore. But in that moment, something inside me whispered, him. Kiss him. Before I could think, I was standing in front of him. I remember his gaze dropping to my mouth, slow and deliberate, like he already knew what I was about to do. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even blink. And that stillness made my heart race even faster. I didn't say a word. I just reached up, placed my hand against his chest, hard, solid, warm through the fabric, and pulled him down to me. The kiss wasn't soft or sweet. It was sharp and reckless and wild like the spark before an explosion. His lips were firm, unyielding, and for a second I thought he might push me away. But then he kissed me back, slow, deliberate, like he was claiming me, tasting the chaos he hadn't ordered but wasn't about to refuse. The noise of the club vanished. There was only his mouth on mine, his hand sliding to the back of my neck, the faint scent of whiskey and smoke clinging to his skin. It felt like falling and burning at the same time. When I finally pulled away, breathless and trembling, I could feel every set of eyes in the room on us. I turned my head just enough to catch Liam's face. Frozen, shocked, jealous. And for one brief, perfect second, I felt victorious. But then I looked back at the man I had kissed, and that's when I realized something was wrong. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't amused or surprised. He was studying me, his expression unreadable, like a predator deciding whether the thing in front of him was prey or something far more interesting. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low, smooth and terrifyingly calm, as if he already owned the answer. "Ava," I managed to whisper, though it came out more like a confession than a name. He nodded once, slowly, as if memorizing it. "Ava," he repeated, letting the syllables linger on his tongue. "Pretty name." Then he leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. You shouldn't have done that. The words sent a chill straight through me, but before I could respond, he smiled. Not the kind that reaches the eyes, but the kind that hides secrets behind perfect white teeth. He set his drink down, turned, and walked away, leaving me standing there with my heart hammering against my ribs and my mind spinning in 1,000 directions. My friends found me a few minutes later, laughing, teasing, demanding details, but all I could think about was that voice, that look, that warning. You shouldn't have done that. It echoed in my head all night. When I got home, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was nothing, just a random kiss, a stupid act of heartbreak-fueled revenge that I'd forget by morning. I took off my heels, wiped off my makeup, stared at my reflection in the mirror, and tried to convince myself that the man in the bar would never think twice about me again. But when I closed my eyes, all I could see was his face. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. My head was pounding, my throat dry, but I grabbed it anyway. Unknown number. No message, just a missed call. I ignored it. But then it rang again, and again, until I finally answered. Hello? A pause. Then that voice, deep, smooth, unmistakable. You kissed me last night. My stomach dropped. Who is this? Another pause, longer this time, as if he was letting me feel the weight of the silence before he filled it. Dante Moretti, he said finally, his tone soft but edged with something sharp enough to cut. I think we need to talk. I froze. I knew that name. Everyone in this city did, even if they pretended not to. You didn't read about him in the newspapers, not directly, but you heard the whispers, the stories that started in the shadows and spread like smoke. A man who owned half the city and ruled the other half through fear. I didn't breathe for several seconds. I think you have the wrong... I don't make mistakes, Ava, he interrupted, his voice lowering to something dangerously intimate. You wanted to make someone jealous. You did. But now you've made someone else interested. And in my world, interest is a very serious thing. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, my pulse thundering in my ears, my mind refusing to process what had just happened. I thought about the kiss, about the way he'd looked at me afterward, not like a man surprised by a stranger's boldness, but like a man who had already decided something. And in that moment, a slow, cold realization crept through me. I hadn't just kissed a stranger. I'd kissed danger itself. And now it knew my name. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again. That quiet, unreadable expression that lingered somewhere between curiosity and warning. The glint of something sharp in his gaze that told me he wasn't like anyone I'd ever met before. And the sound of his voice whispering through the dark, like a secret I hadn't meant to keep, but somehow already belonged to. I kept replaying that kiss. Over and over, the heat of his mouth, the taste of whiskey, the way his hand had curved around the back of my neck, as if he could feel the chaos he was about to cause inside me. By morning, I had almost convinced myself that it had been nothing more than a surreal dream, the kind that leaves you breathless but fades the moment daylight touches it. I got dressed for work, pulled my hair back, painted my lips the same shade of red that still haunted me from last night, and told myself that Dante Moretti was just a name, a ghost story that men whispered about when they wanted to sound powerful and dangerous. Men like him didn't notice girls like me, not really, and certainly not because of one reckless kiss in a crowded club. But when I stepped into the small marketing firm where I worked, fluorescent lights humming, printers whirring, the usual chaos of deadlines and caffeine addictions, I felt the weight of something shift, like the air had changed. It was subtle at first. The way conversations died mid-sentence, the way heads turned just slightly, the way silence spread in waves from the reception desk to the back office. And then I saw him. He was standing by the glass doors, a black coat draped over one arm, the same calm expression that had terrified me now, softened into something dangerously charming. His suit was perfectly cut, his tie immaculate, his presence so magnetic it made the entire room seem smaller, as if gravity itself bent toward him. Dante Moretti in broad daylight, in my office. A nightmare wrapped in elegance. For a long moment I couldn't move. It was as though my body had forgotten how to function, how to breathe, how to look away. He saw me before I could decide what to do, and when his gaze locked on mine, the noise of the office faded, replaced by that same hum I'd felt the night before, the electric tension that made my heart trip over itself. "Miss Romano," he said smoothly, his voice low but carrying, the kind that silenced an entire room without needing to raise it. "I believe you and I have unfinished business." Every pair of eyes in the room turned to me, and I felt a flush creep up my neck. My boss, a woman who'd built her career on charm and composure, looked like she might faint. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to work. "Mr. Moretti, what are you doing here?" He smiled, not with warmth, but with precision, the kind of smile that hides knives behind it. "Having coffee," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "With you." There was no room for argument. He gestured toward the lobby cafe across the street, and I followed because what else could I do? Saying no to a man like him felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and daring the wind to push you. Once we were seated, the silence between us felt alive. He watched me like a puzzle he enjoyed solving, while I tried to keep my hands from shaking around the coffee cup I hadn't even touched. "You kissed me," he said finally, his tone more observation than accusation. "Do you make a habit of doing that to strangers, or was I special?" I felt my cheeks burn. "It was a mistake," I said quickly, my voice softer than I wanted it to be. I was angry. My ex was there. I wasn't thinking. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze sharp and assessing, as if he could see every thought that crossed my mind. "Anger makes people do interesting things," he murmured. "But I don't believe in mistakes, Ava. Everything we do has consequences, especially the things we don't mean." The way he said my name made my pulse stutter. "You tracked me down for a kiss?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. His smile widened, slow and deliberate. "Let's call it curiosity," he said. "You walked into my world without realizing it, and I wanted to see what kind of woman does that. Most people run from danger. You walked straight into it." And smiled. "I didn't smile," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if that was true. "No," he said, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the table. "You didn't. But your eyes did." There was something unnerving about the way he spoke. Calm, deliberate, like every word was part of a game only he knew the rules to. And yet beneath that calm I could feel something darker pulsing, control, danger, and a kind of fascination that mirrored my own, though I didn't want to admit it. He asked me questions, simple ones at first. Where I worked, where I lived, whether I believed in fate. Each one seemed harmless until I realized how much he was learning without revealing anything in return. His answers were vague, his smile constant, but his eyes never stopped moving, taking in everything, cataloging it like data he could use later. "You're making me nervous," I finally said, forcing a small laugh that sounded too thin to be believable. "Good," he replied softly. "Nervous means you understand what I am." "And what are you exactly?" I asked before I could stop myself. He leaned back, his gaze drifting briefly to the window where the city moved on, blissfully unaware of the danger sitting across from me. "Someone you shouldn't have kissed," he said. Then after a pause, "But I'm not sure I want you to regret it." I didn't know what to say. My instinct screamed to leave, but something stronger, something reckless and curious, kept me glued to my seat. When we finally stood to leave, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my shoulder, the touch so subtle it felt accidental. But his eyes said otherwise. "Be careful, Ava," he murmured. "Some debts can't be paid with apologies." And then he was gone, slipping into a sleek black car that pulled away from the curb like a ghost disappearing into daylight. I stood there for what felt like forever, my thoughts spinning faster than I could catch them. When I finally walked back into the office, everyone stared at me like I'd just had lunch with the devil. And maybe I had. My boss pulled me aside, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Ava, do you know who that man is?" I nodded slowly. "I do now." For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed deeper. I told myself I'd never see him again, that he'd gotten whatever curiosity he had out of his system. But when I got home that night, there was an envelope waiting on my doorstep. No name, no return address, just my name written in neat, elegant handwriting. Inside was a single card. "You shouldn't have done that." And beneath it, a black rose petal pressed flat against the paper. It's strange how quickly fear can turn into fascination, how the thing that should make you run instead pulls you closer, how curiosity starts to whisper louder than caution until it drowns out every warning your mind tries to give you. For days after that envelope appeared on my doorstep, I couldn't stop thinking about him. About the card, the black rose petal, the way my name looked in his handwriting, precise and deliberate, as if even the letters belonged to him. I kept the card in the drawer by my bed, told myself I should throw it away. But every night my fingers found their way back to it, tracing the words like they held a secret I was supposed to understand. At work, I caught myself glancing toward the windows, half expecting to see that black car again, half terrified that I actually wanted to. My coworkers had stopped asking questions. They just watched me with that uneasy mixture of curiosity and fear, whispering things they thought I couldn't hear. And maybe they were right to be afraid, because a part of me knew it wasn't over, that the kiss which had started as a petty act of revenge had somehow become a thread binding me to a man whose name lived in shadows. Liam called 3 days later. His name flashed on my phone, and for a moment I almost didn't answer. But old habits die hard, and curiosity has always been my weakness. His voice, when it came through, was cold and sharp, stripped of the warmth I used to know. "So," he said, without greeting, without pretense, "you've moved on quickly." I didn't respond right away. I walked to the window, the city spread out below me in a blur of light and motion, and pressed the phone to my ear. "I didn't move on," I said finally. "You let go first, remember?" He laughed, that low, mocking sound that used to make me flinch. "You really think kissing him was a good idea, Ava? You have no idea what kind of man you're dealing with." The way he said him made something twist inside me. "What do you mean?" "I mean Dante Moretti," Liam said, drawing out the name like it was poison. "You think that's some random guy you picked up in a club? He's not. He's dangerous. He runs things you don't want to understand. He's killed people, Ava. He owns people." I gripped the curtain, heart thundering. "You don't know that." "I do," he said darkly. "Because men like him don't just exist in this city without leaving a trail. You think I don't know his name? You think I don't know who you kissed in front of everyone? You embarrassed me, and you did it with the one man nobody touches unless they have a death wish." His words sliced through me, hot and bitter. But beneath the fear there was something else, something that felt disturbingly like defiance. "I didn't plan it," I said. "It was one kiss, that's all." "That's not how men like Moretti work," he snapped. "You don't just kiss a man like him and walk away. You've marked yourself, Ava. You're in his orbit now, whether you meant to be or not. And trust me, he doesn't let go of anything once it's his." For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Then I said quietly, "Why do you care?" That caught him off guard. I could hear the shift in his breathing. "Because I know how this ends," he said finally, voice lowering to a warning. "And because even after everything, I don't want to see you get hurt." I hung up before he could say anything else. That night, I dreamed of Dante. Not the man in the suit, not the calm, collected stranger, but something darker. I saw his eyes in the shadows, his hands stained crimson, his mouth whispering my name like a curse. I woke up drenched in sweat, my pulse racing, the city outside my window silent and watchful. The next morning, a car was waiting for me outside my building. A sleek black vehicle with tinted windows that caught the sunlight like obsidian. The driver, tall, suited, impassive, stepped out and opened the door without a word. "Mr. Moretti sent for you," he said. I should have refused. I should have slammed the door and called the police or packed a bag and disappeared. But instead I found myself stepping inside. My heart a wild drumbeat against my ribs, every instinct screaming and yet somehow soothed by the inevitability of it all. The drive was silent. The city blurred past in streaks of gray and gold until we reached a private street lined with iron gates and ivy-covered walls. When the car stopped, the driver opened my door again and gestured toward a massive stone building. Not quite a mansion, not quite a fortress, but something in between. Dante was waiting at the top of the stairs. He wasn't smiling this time. His expression was unreadable, calm in a way that made my nerves twist. "You shouldn't ignore your phone," he said softly. "I don't like being kept waiting." I blinked. "You called me?" "Twice," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. Then I decided to stop asking. "I didn't hear." He raised a hand, silencing me. "I know." There was something about the way he looked at me, like he could see every thought, every fear, every lie before I even spoke it. I followed him inside because it felt like I didn't have a choice, though a part of me realized with startling clarity that I wanted to. The interior was all marble and shadow, soft light glinting off glass and steel. He led me into a room lined with books and old portraits, the kind of space that smelled like power and money and danger. "Your ex called me," Dante said suddenly. I froze. "Liam?" He nodded once, slowly. "He seems concerned. Said he wanted to warn me about you." I felt the blood drain from my face. "He, what? Why would he?" Dante smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. "He said you like to play games, that you used me to make him jealous, that you're reckless." He stepped closer, his voice lowering until it was almost a whisper. Was he right? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. It wasn't like that. Then how was it? "I was angry," I admitted, my voice shaking. "He hurt me. I wanted to hurt him back. That's all." For a moment, Dante just studied me, his expression impossible to read. Then he leaned in, so close I could feel the heat of his breath. "You hurt him," he murmured, "but you also caught the attention of a man who doesn't like to lose." "Are you talking about him or you?" I whispered. His lips curved, not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one. "Both." The tension between us felt electric, dangerous, like standing too close to lightning. I could feel his presence everywhere, in the air, in the silence, in the steady, unhurried rhythm of his breathing. "You're playing with something you don't understand," he said finally. "And now your ex has made himself part of it. He shouldn't have done that." "What do you mean?" He turned toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Let's just say Liam doesn't understand who he's trying to provoke. He's been asking questions about me, following people. That kind of curiosity tends to end badly." Fear twisted in my chest. "You're not going to hurt him, are you?" Dante looked over his shoulder, his eyes like cold smoke. "That depends on you, Ava." I stared at him, heart racing. "What does that mean?" He walked toward me slowly, his voice dropping to something dark and intimate. It means that you walked into my world, and now everything connected to you belongs to it. Your choices, your mistakes, even your past. He stopped inches away, his hand lifting to tilt my chin up until I was forced to meet his gaze. If he comes near you again, I'll take care of it. Permanently, do you understand? I couldn't speak. I could only nod. Good, he said softly, his thumb brushing my jaw. Then you'll stay close to me until this is over. I should have said no. I should have run. But instead I felt that same dizzying pull I'd felt since the first night. That mix of fear and fascination that wrapped around me like silk and steel. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath the panic and confusion, a part of me wanted to know what it meant to belong to him. And that terrified me more than anything. There are certain moments in life that split time in half, the before and the after, the moment you thought you understood who you were, and the one that quietly, ruthlessly proves you wrong. That evening, when Dante Moretti told me he was taking me to dinner, I didn't yet understand that I was crossing that invisible line, the one you can never step back over once you've seen what waits on the other side. I told myself it was just a meal, a conversation, a chance to clear the air and maybe, if I was lucky, end whatever strange game had begun between us. But deep down, some quiet part of me already knew that wasn't true. Because Dante didn't do casual, and he didn't do harmless. Everything he touched had meaning, purpose, consequence, and when he looked at me with those midnight eyes and said, 7 o'clock, dress accordingly, I felt the air leave my lungs in one long, trembling exhale. I stood in front of my mirror for almost an hour before I could decide what to wear. Every dress felt too much or not enough, every color either too innocent or too suggestive. I finally settled on black, simple, fitted, the kind of dress that felt like armor when I slipped it over my skin. My hands shook as I fastened the clasp of my necklace, and I caught my reflection. Pale skin, dark eyes, a faint, nervous flush creeping up my throat, and wondered who I was becoming. I had never been the kind of woman who let danger look her in the eye and step closer instead of away. But somehow, that's exactly who I was turning into. The car arrived exactly on time, a long black sedan that gleamed under the city lights like a promise. The driver didn't speak, only nodded politely as he opened the door. I tried to tell myself this wasn't real, that it was some elaborate misunderstanding, that Dante was just playing out some twisted curiosity. But the truth was, a part of me wanted to see what came next. When we pulled up in front of the restaurant, my breath caught. It wasn't one of the loud, glittering places filled with people trying to be seen. It was quiet, exclusive, tucked behind wrought iron gates and guarded by men who looked like soldiers dressed as waiters. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and expensive wine, and the walls were lined with dark wood and candlelight that flickered across polished surfaces like whispers of fire. Dante was already there, of course, seated at a private table in the corner, the picture of control and elegance. His suit was black again, always black, his shirt open at the collar just enough to be indecently perfect, his expression calm, but his gaze fixed entirely on me. When I walked toward him, it felt like the whole room faded into shadow, as if he had drawn all the light toward himself, and I was simply walking into his gravity. "Ava," he said softly when I reached him, his voice low and warm, like velvet brushed over glass. "You clean up beautifully." "You make it sound like I'm usually a mess," I said, trying to smile, though my heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear myself. He tilted his head slightly, amusement ghosting across his mouth. "You're too honest to be a mess," he said. "That's what makes you dangerous." I didn't know how to answer that, so I just sat down, feeling the weight of his attention settle over me like silk and iron. A waiter appeared almost immediately, silent and efficient, placing wine before us without a word. I reached for the glass, desperate for something to do with my hands, but Dante stopped me with a quiet murmur. "I ordered for you," he said. I froze, the instinct to protest rising in my chest, but the look in his eyes told me not to. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted, his tone gentle but final. "It's a habit of mine." I forced a small laugh, though it came out weaker than I intended. "Controlling?" "Protective," he corrected, taking a slow sip of his wine. "The difference is subtle, but it matters." The food arrived, dishes I couldn't name, arranged with the kind of precision that made eating them feel almost sacrilegious. But it wasn't the meal that mattered. It was the conversation, the slow unraveling of words between us, the way he asked questions that felt like they came from somewhere deeper than curiosity. He wanted to know about my family, my childhood, the things that scared me, the things I wanted but never said aloud. And though I told myself to be careful, to guard my answers, somehow everything that came out of my mouth felt like a confession. When I asked him about himself, he smiled, not dismissively, but with the faint sadness of someone who has long since accepted the distance between what is asked and what can be said. "There are parts of my life you wouldn't understand," he said finally. "Or maybe you would. That's what I'm trying to find out." "You don't talk much about what you do," I said quietly. "No," he agreed, leaning back slightly, the candlelight carving shadows across his face. "Because what I do isn't polite dinner conversation." Something in his voice sent a chill through me, but it wasn't entirely fear. It was fascination. The sharp, addictive kind that comes from standing too close to fire and realizing you want to see how hot it burns. I should have looked away when the door opened and two men entered. Broad, serious, moving with the kind of confidence that only comes from power or violence. They went straight to Dante's table, speaking to him in low, urgent tones. I caught only fragments. Shipment, problem, rival territory. Words that didn't belong in restaurants or polite company. Dante's expression didn't change, but his eyes did. They darkened, a flash of something cold and dangerous slicing through the calm. He rose from his seat with slow precision, adjusting his cufflinks like a man preparing for war. "Excuse me," he said quietly. The two men followed him toward the back of the restaurant, and though I knew I shouldn't, I turned just enough to see what happened next. It wasn't loud. No shouting. No chaos. Just a few quiet words exchanged. A gesture. A sound that might have been a plea, and then silence. When Dante returned, his jacket was buttoned, his hair perfectly in place, his expression smooth again. "Everything all right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He poured himself another glass of wine. "It is now." There was something final in the way he said it, something that made my stomach twist. I wanted to ask more, to demand to know what kind of man could walk into a room, order dinner, and quietly end a crisis between appetizers and dessert. But I didn't, because some part of me already knew the answer. The rest of the meal passed in silence. When we finally left, the night air felt heavy, thick with something unspoken. Dante walked me to the car, his hand brushing mine in a gesture that felt almost tender. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked as the driver opened the door. I hesitated. "I don't know what I enjoyed," I admitted. "The food, the company, or the danger." He smiled, a real one this time, slow and devastating. "You say that like they're different things?" As I slid into the car, he leaned down, his voice low and deliberate. "You're not afraid of me, Ava. Not yet. But you should be." The door closed, and before I could breathe, the car was already moving, the city lights streaking past the window like fire. I pressed my hand to my chest, felt the wild, uneven rhythm of my heart, and realized something that chilled me to my core. I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of how much I didn't want to be. There is a moment, I think, when every person realizes they've gone too far. When the world around you no longer feels like something you can step out of or escape. When the air changes. When freedom becomes a memory instead of a choice. For me, that moment came quietly, the morning after that dinner, when I woke to find my phone buzzing on the nightstand, the light from the screen flickering across my face like a warning I didn't yet understand. The first message was from my boss, asking me to call her immediately. The second was from an unknown number, a number I didn't need to guess. Stay home today. No name, no explanation, just those 3 words, and yet somehow they felt heavier than any command I'd ever heard. My first instinct was to ignore it, to go to work, to pretend I still lived in a normal world where mysterious men didn't know where I slept. But when I stepped to the window and saw the black car parked across the street, I froze. The same car, the same driver, sitting still, watching. For a long time I stood there, my fingers pressed to the cold glass, wondering what would happen if I pretended I didn't see it. But curiosity has always been stronger than fear. And part of me, the foolish, reckless part that never learned from her own warnings, wanted to know why. When I finally called my boss, her voice was tight, controlled in that way people sound when they're afraid but don't want to admit it. "Ava," she said, "I'm sorry, but we have to let you go." My stomach dropped. "What? Why?" She hesitated, and that pause told me everything I needed to know. "The company's under new scrutiny," she said carefully, choosing each word like it might explode. "Some clients, they don't want their names associated with yours right now." "With mine?" I repeated, numb. "I don't know what's happening, Ava," she said, and I believed her. "But I think you should stay away from the office. Just take some time. Please." She hung up before I could say another word, and the silence that followed felt different than before. Not empty, but full. Thick with the realization that my life was beginning to collapse inward, piece by piece, and that somehow, without meaning to, I had become part of something I couldn't see. I didn't leave the apartment that day. I couldn't. The car stayed outside until nightfall, and when it finally pulled away, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd imagined all of it. That my mind was playing tricks on me. But then the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there he was. Dante stood in the hallway like he belonged there. No guards, no entourage, just himself, dressed in black as always, the faint scent of smoke and cologne following him like an aura. His expression was calm, but there was something in his eyes. Something darker than usual. Sharper. Like steel under velvet. "You shouldn't have opened the door without asking who it was," he said quietly. "You need to be more careful." "I didn't know I needed to be careful," I said, my voice shaking before I could stop it. "At least not until you walked into my life." His lips curved faintly, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's not entirely true," he said. "You knew what you were doing the night you kissed me. Maybe not who I was, but you knew enough to feel the danger." "I didn't ask for this," I whispered. He stepped closer, and I felt the heat of his body even before his hand brushed against mine. "That's the thing about choices," he murmured. "You make them long before you understand what they cost." For a long time, we just stood there, the air between us charged with something electric. Something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite desire, but lived somewhere in the fragile, trembling space between. Finally, he spoke again. "You're not safe here," he said. "Not after what your ex did." I blinked. "Liam? What does he have to do with—" "He's been talking to people he shouldn't," Dante interrupted, his tone shifting harder now. "Asking questions about me, about us. That kind of attention brings trouble, Ava. You're part of my world now, whether you want to be or not, and that means you have enemies you can't even name. I wanted to laugh, to tell him how absurd that sounded. Me, an ordinary woman, with enemies. But the look in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't exaggerating, he was warning me. What are you saying? I asked quietly. I'm saying you're coming with me. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered in a voice so calm and certain that I didn't even realize I was obeying until I was already gathering a few things into a bag. He drove me himself this time, through streets that grew darker and emptier as we left the city behind. Neither of us spoke for a long time, though the silence wasn't comfortable. It was alive, humming with unspoken questions and the steady rhythm of the road beneath us. When I finally dared to glance at him, his profile was illuminated by the passing lights. Strong, controlled, almost beautiful. In that terrible way, storms are beautiful when you're standing too close. Where are we going? I asked. Somewhere safer, he said simply. The somewhere turned out to be a sprawling estate at the edge of the water, the kind of place that looked more like a myth than a home. Towering gates, long stone driveways, gardens that vanished into fog. When we arrived, the doors opened without a word, like everyone already knew who I was and why I was there. Inside, the air smelled like rain and old wood, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd stepped into someone else's life entirely. Dante led me through hallways lined with paintings and marble statues, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back, not guiding, but claiming. You'll stay here until I say otherwise, he said, stopping at a door at the end of a corridor. There's staff if you need anything, but they'll give you privacy. Don't leave the property, not yet. I turned to him, the weight of it all finally sinking in. You can't just keep me here. He looked at me for a long moment and then said softly, I'm not keeping you. I'm protecting you. There's a difference even if it doesn't feel like it. And how long am I supposed to be protected? I asked, bitterness slipping into my tone. He smiled faintly, and the expression made something twist inside me. Until I'm sure the people who want to hurt you have learned better. Who are they? He hesitated. People who want to hurt me, he said finally. And they'll use anything, or anyone, they can. I wanted to argue, to scream that none of this made sense, but the truth was, part of me already believed him. Maybe it was the certainty in his voice, or the way he carried himself like a man who had learned the cost of being wrong. But I didn't press further. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bed was soft. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. But the silence outside the windows was too complete. Too heavy. I got up, wrapped a blanket around myself, and wandered down the hall toward the balcony overlooking the sea. The water was black and endless, the moonlight breaking against it in silver streaks that looked almost like scars. I don't know how long I stood there before I heard footsteps behind me. You should rest, Dante said quietly. I turned, startled, but he was already leaning against the doorframe, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked less like a man, and more like something elemental. Beautiful, dangerous, inevitable. I can't, I admitted. He nodded slowly, then crossed the room until he was beside me, his presence so close it was almost tangible. You'll get used to it, he said. The quiet, the uncertainty. I looked up at him, searching his face. Is that what this is, Dante? Uncertainty? He met my gaze, and in his eyes I saw the truth, dark, unflinching, and terrifyingly certain. No, he said softly. This is inevitability, and that was when I realized the truth. That I wasn't his guest. I was his captive wrapped in silk, protected by the same cage that held me. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, part of me no longer wanted to escape. The first few days in Dante's house passed like a dream that never quite let me wake. The kind of dream that wraps itself around you with silk, soft hands and whispers that it's keeping you safe even while you know, deep down, that safety isn't really what it wants from you. I tried to pretend that I was still myself, that I could measure time by sunlight and meals, that I could still decide when to open a door or where to walk. But the truth settled in slowly, like mist seeping through cracks. I wasn't a guest here, not really, and I wasn't free, not in any sense that mattered. The gates outside were locked, the guards polite but unyielding, the world beyond the iron and marble unreachable. And yet, in the strangest way, I wasn't afraid of it. I was afraid of how easy it was to stop wanting to leave. He didn't hover, not at first. Dante had this way of being everywhere and nowhere at once, of letting his absence feel like a presence, of making me aware of him in every flicker of candlelight, in the faint echo of footsteps down the hall, in the scent of smoke that lingered long after he'd passed through a room. Sometimes, when I sat on the balcony and watched the sea break itself against the cliffs below, I could feel him watching me. Not from malice, but from some silent, unspoken compulsion that I didn't yet understand. The staff moved quietly, as if trained to speak only when necessary. A woman named Sophia brought my meals, her smile kind but cautious, her eyes flicking toward the corners of the room as though they were being watched. When I tried to ask her about Dante, who he was, what this place really was, she only shook her head and whispered, "He protects what's his." The words should have frightened me, but instead they settled deep in my chest like a truth I wasn't ready to admit. It was on the fourth night that he came to me. I was sitting by the fire in the small library at the far end of the house, reading a book I hadn't actually been reading at all, letting the words blur into meaningless shapes, while my mind wandered to the sound of waves outside. When he walked in, the air seemed to shift, like the entire room breathed differently just because he was in it. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, one hand resting on the back of the armchair opposite mine, his gaze moving over me with that quiet, measured intensity that made it impossible to look away. "You don't like the silence," he said finally, his voice low, the kind of voice that sounds almost tender until you realize it's threaded with command. I set the book down, my fingers brushing the spine as if I needed something to hold on to. "It's too quiet here," I admitted. "It feels like the house is waiting for something." He smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth lifting just enough to be dangerous. "It's waiting for you to stop pretending you want to leave." The words hit me like a pulse. I opened my mouth to deny it, to tell him that all I wanted was to go back to my life, my apartment, my friends, the world where my name still belonged to me. But the lie caught in my throat, because some part of me, the part that dreamed in dark colors and restless nights, knew he was right. He crossed the room and poured 2 glasses of wine, the motion smooth, deliberate, every gesture a performance of control. When he handed me one, his fingers brushed mine. A brief, electric contact that made my pulse stumble. "Tell me," he said, "do you hate me yet?" I blinked, thrown by the question. Should I? His smile deepened, but his eyes stayed cold. Most people do eventually, once they realize what I am. "And what are you?" I asked softly. He studied me for a long moment, as though weighing how much of the truth I could handle. Then quietly, "A man who takes what he wants and doesn't apologize for it." Something in me trembled, not just from fear, but from recognition, from the dark, forbidden thrill of hearing someone say aloud the thing most men hide. I wanted to look away, to stop the spell he was weaving without even trying, but I couldn't. "Is that what you did with me?" I asked. "Took what you wanted?" He stepped closer, so close that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, his breath grazing my skin like a whisper. No, he said, his voice almost a growl. What I want from you can't be taken. It has to be given. My heart was beating so fast I thought he might hear it. I should have told him to leave, to stop, to let me go. But instead I asked, "And what is it you want?" His hand came up, slow, deliberate, fingers brushing the side of my face as though testing whether I'd pull away. "Loyalty," he said finally. "Trust, obedience, the truth." "That sounds like ownership," I said, though my voice betrayed me, softer now, thinner. "It's protection," he murmured, "but it only works if you stop running from what's already yours." There it was again, that word, yours, spoken with such certainty that it made something deep inside me quake. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My silence was an answer in itself. When he finally stepped back, the distance between us felt colder than before, as if he'd taken something invisible with him. He turned toward the window, his voice lower now, almost thoughtful. "Your ex came to see me again," he said. My stomach tightened. "Liam?" "Yes. He's desperate now, reckless. He doesn't understand the kind of danger he's invited." "What did you do to him?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. He looked back at me, and in that moment, the flicker of firelight caught something in his eyes that made my breath catch. Regret, maybe, or something close to it. "Nothing yet," he said. "But if he keeps pushing, I'll have no choice. I can't have anyone thinking they can touch what's mine without consequence." "Stop saying that," I whispered. "I'm not yours." He took a slow step toward me, the space between us shrinking again until I could feel the edge of his words against my skin. "Then why are you still here?" I wanted to scream, to tell him that I was here because he'd taken my choice away, because fear had trapped me. But the truth was more complicated than that. Because even if he opened the door, even if he told me to run, I wasn't sure I would. Somewhere between fear and fascination, I'd lost track of the difference. He must have seen it in my face, that flicker of confusion, of surrender, because he reached out again, his hand brushing down my arm, slow and deliberate, leaving a trail of heat in its wake. "You can hate me all you want," he said softly, "but don't lie to yourself about what this is." And then he kissed me. It wasn't like the first time. That kiss had been reckless, impulsive, a weapon flung in the heat of anger. This one was deliberate, consuming, the kind of kiss that doesn't just steal your breath, but replaces it with something else entirely. Fire, darkness, need. My hands found his shoulders, not to push him away, but to hold on, because the room was spinning, the world was collapsing, and all that was left was the taste of him, the feel of his heartbeat pressed against mine. When he pulled back, his voice was rough, unsteady in a way I'd never heard before. "You think you're afraid of me?" he said, "but what you're really afraid of is that you're not." I wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. The fear had changed. It wasn't the kind that makes you run. It was the kind that makes you stay. That night, as I lay awake listening to the sound of waves breaking against the cliffs, I realized that whatever line there had been between fear and desire had disappeared completely, and I was standing on the edge of something far darker, something that looked too much like love to be anything else, and too much like ruin to survive. It's strange how easily the human heart can begin to mistake danger for safety. How fear, when fed in small doses and wrapped in velvet, begins to feel like comfort. How the very thing that once sent your pulse racing in warning becomes the rhythm you crave most. By the time I realized how deeply Dante had rooted himself into the rhythm of my days, it was already too late to imagine life without his shadow. The house no longer felt like a cage, but like an echo of him. Every corner, every corridor, every lingering trace of his cologne whispered his name even when he wasn't there, and I found myself listening for the sound of his footsteps as, though the silence itself depended on his presence to make sense. The days bled together, each one quiet and careful, filled with a tension that lived beneath the surface like an electric current. I spent hours wandering through rooms I'd never seen before, touching the cold marble of statues that stared back at me with unseeing eyes, standing by windows that opened onto the endless gray stretch of the sea. I told myself I was only waiting for something to happen, a change, an explanation, maybe even an end. But the truth, the one I didn't dare say aloud, was that I was waiting for him. And when he came, it was never gently. That evening, the air was heavy with the smell of rain, the kind of storm that presses against the windows before it breaks. I had been reading in the library again, or pretending to, when I heard the sound of his voice in the hall, low and sharp, the cadence of command. There was another man with him, someone I didn't recognize, his voice pleading, defensive. I shouldn't have listened, but curiosity is its own form of compulsion, so I stood by the door, heart pounding, catching fragments that made my skin crawl. You said it was handled. Dante's voice, steady, clipped, colder than I'd ever heard it. I did, but they moved faster than we thought. A sound, soft and terrible, the thud of a hand meeting flesh, and then silence. When I finally gathered the courage to open the door, the hall was empty except for Dante, standing with his back to me, his knuckles red, his jaw tight. He didn't look at me right away. When he finally did, his eyes were darker than I'd ever seen them. No longer the polished calm of control, but something rawer, something that lived beneath the surface of civilization. Was that necessary? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He studied me for a moment, his gaze unreadable. You don't ask about things that don't concern you, Ava. The way he said it, not cruel but final, sent a shiver through me, and yet I couldn't stop myself. He looked terrified. He should be, Dante said simply, wiping his hand with a white handkerchief that now bore a faint stain of red. Fear keeps people honest. And what keeps you honest? I asked, the question leaving my lips like a dare. His smile was slow, almost sad. You, he said. The word hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I didn't know what to do with it. This idea that I could be any kind of light in the world he inhabited. That I could be the thing standing between him and whatever darkness drove him. But when he stepped closer, when his hand reached up to brush the hair from my face, I felt that same dangerous gravity pulling me closer, and I didn't fight it. I told you, he murmured, his voice quieter now. This world isn't kind, but it doesn't have to destroy you. You could belong here if you wanted to. I don't, I whispered, though even I could hear the doubt in my voice. He tilted his head slightly, his thumb tracing the edge of my jaw, his touch careful but commanding. Then why haven't you run? I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. Maybe I stayed because leaving had stopped feeling like an option. Maybe because I had become addicted to the way he said my name, or because every time I thought I'd found the edge of his cruelty, I saw something else. Tenderness, regret, a glimpse of the man he might have been if the world had been gentler. That night he took me to a part of the estate I hadn't seen before, down a winding staircase that led to a garden blooming in the dark, the air filled with the scent of roses and rain. The flowers grew wild, climbing over stone walls and wrought iron, their petals deep crimson, almost black in the half-light. My mother planted these, he said quietly, his hand brushing over one of the blossoms. She said roses were like people. The more they're cut, the stronger they grow back. She sounds wise, I said, though what I really wanted to say was, she sounds like she loved you once. She was, he replied, but she learned too late that beauty is a weapon. He turned to me then, and in that moment I saw it, Not the man the world feared, but the boy he might have been once, full of hunger and hope and the promise of something unspoiled. Do you understand that, Ava? That beauty can destroy just as much as it saves? I'm beginning to, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking about the roses or about him. He reached out then, fingers ghosting over my wrist, the lightest touch, and yet it set fire to something inside me that I didn't know how to put out. The air between us tightened, thick with all the things we hadn't said, all the choices we'd already made without meaning to. When he kissed me, it wasn't gentle. It was a claim, a confession, a collision of everything we'd both been denying. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, soaking us until my hair clung to my skin, until his shirt darkened against his body, until the taste of the storm mixed with the taste of him. His hands found my face, my waist, my throat. His touch both reverent and possessive, and I let him, because fighting it felt like lying to myself. He pulled back just enough to speak, his breath hot against my lips. "You don't belong in my world," he said, "but I can't let you leave it." "Then what am I to you?" I asked, my voice shaking. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "The only thing that still feels real." Something in me broke at that. The last fragile thread of reason or distance or self-preservation snapping quietly in the dark. I pressed my forehead against his, and for one fleeting, impossible second, it felt like love. Not the kind that heals or saves, but the kind that consumes, that devours until there's nothing left but the echo of your own heartbeat reflected in someone else's. When the storm finally passed, the garden was scattered with petals, red against the stone, soft and torn. He picked one up, pressed it into my palm, closing my fingers around it. "Everything beautiful bleeds," he said. "Remember that." Later, lying in his bed, the sheets tangled around us, I traced the scar on his shoulder with my fingertips, wondering how many stories were carved into his skin that he'd never tell. His arm was heavy around me, his breathing steady, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't dream of escape. I dreamt of roses and blood and the sound of his voice saying my name like it meant something more than possession. But when morning came, and I woke to find him gone, the sheets still warm where he'd been, I found another petal on the pillow beside me, deep red, wet with something that wasn't dew. And that was when I realized that love in Dante's world didn't just bloom, it bled. It's almost laughable, how quickly peace can turn into chaos, how easily the illusion of safety can be ripped away by a single phone call, a single whisper, a single ghost from a past you thought you'd buried under enough silence to make it stay dead. I had begun, foolishly, to believe that the storm had passed, that whatever existed between Dante and me had found a fragile rhythm. Not normal, never normal, but something that breathed like it could last for a little while longer. The days had grown slower, softer even. The house no longer a prison, but a strange kind of sanctuary. And sometimes when I woke before dawn, I could hear the sound of him breathing beside me, deep and steady, like a promise that the world outside couldn't touch us. I should have known that promises like that don't survive in Dante's world. They are made to be broken, usually by blood. It started with a whisper from one of the guards. Hushed voices down the hall, the kind that stop the moment you draw too near. And then came the phone call. I didn't mean to answer it. Dante had told me not to pick up any number I didn't recognize, and for a while I obeyed him. But the call came 3 times in a row. Insistent, almost frantic. And when I finally pressed it to my ear, I heard a voice I hadn't expected to hear again. "Ava?" "Liam." For a moment I couldn't speak. The sound of his voice pulled me backward, through months of heartbreak and anger and longing, into a life that already felt like someone else's story. He sounded different, thinner, desperate, his usual confidence stripped away. "Liam," I whispered, "how did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter," he said quickly. "Listen to me, Ava. You have to get out of there. You don't understand what he's capable of." My heart tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," he snapped, his voice breaking. Slightly. "I've seen things. I've heard things. He's not who you think he is. You think he loves you? You're just leverage. A weakness. You're a way for him to control the people who want him gone. You think you're safe, but you're not. You're in the middle of a war, Ava." "Stop," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "You're lying. You don't know him." "Don't I?" he asked. "You have no idea the kind of man you're sleeping next to. He's killed people, Ava. He's killed for less than this." I wanted to hang up, to make his voice disappear, but something in his tone, the urgency, the fear, rooted me to the spot. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I'm trying to save you," he said, and for a heartbeat I heard the man I used to love in that voice, the one who used to hold my hand and tell me he'd protect me from the world. "Meet me, just once. I can show you everything, please, before it's too late." Before I could answer, before I could even breathe, the phone was gone from my hand. Dante stood behind me, silent, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen before he crushed it in his palm and dropped the shattered pieces onto the floor. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. The silence was worse than any shout, heavier, more dangerous. "Who was that?" he asked finally, his voice so calm it didn't sound human. I swallowed hard. "Liam." "And what did he want?" He said I wasn't safe," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "He's right," he murmured, "but not for the reason he thinks." "Dante." He raised a hand, stopping me, his gaze distant now, calculating, like he was already 5 moves ahead in a game I didn't understand. "He shouldn't have called you," he said softly. "That was a mistake." "What are you going to do?" I asked, though I already knew. He turned to me then, and for a moment I thought I saw something like pain flicker in his eyes, but it was gone too quickly to be sure. "Whatever I have to," he said. I stepped closer, my voice trembling. "Please don't hurt him." He looked at me for a long time, and when he spoke again his tone was quieter, more dangerous. "He made himself part of this, Ava. I gave him a chance to walk away, and he didn't. There's no going back now." I reached for him, but he pulled away, his movements sharp, controlled. "You don't understand what mercy looks like in my world," he said. "Sometimes it means letting someone live. Sometimes it means making sure they can never come near you again." He left that night without telling me where he was going. But I knew. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the rain fall, every flash of lightning cutting through the darkness like a warning I couldn't stop. When I finally fell asleep, it was to the sound of thunder and the echo of Liam's voice saying, "You're not safe." He came back just before sunrise. His shirt was damp, his sleeves rolled up, his collar undone, and though there was no visible blood, something in his eyes told me there had been some. He didn't speak, didn't explain, just poured himself a drink and sat in silence, the muscles in his jaw tense beneath his skin. "What did you do?" I whispered. He didn't look at me when he answered. "I kept my promise." I crossed the room slowly, my pulse racing. "Dante, please, tell me you didn't—" He looked up then, and whatever I was about to say died in my throat. "I told you I'd protect you," he said. "Even from yourself." "From myself?" He nodded once. "You were never going to let him go." "Not really." "So I did it for you." I stared at him, the words landing like stones in my chest. "You didn't—" "I didn't kill him," he interrupted. And though I wanted to believe that should have made me feel better, it didn't. But I made sure he'll never come near you again. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't want to know. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel the weight of what he'd done pressing between us, heavy and irreversible, and yet, beneath the horror, beneath the grief and the anger and the fear, there was something else. A dark, traitorous sense of relief. Because some small broken part of me had wanted exactly this. To be untouchable, to be chosen, to be the one he would burn the world for. That realization frightened me more than anything he could have done. He stood then, walked toward me, and when his hand came up to cut my face, I didn't flinch. His thumb traced the line of my cheek, gentle now, almost reverent. "You hate me right now," he said quietly. "But one day you'll understand. This is what love looks like when you don't know how to do it gently." I wanted to tell him that love wasn't supposed to look like this, that love wasn't supposed to leave bruises on the world around it. But the words tangled in my throat because part of me already knew it didn't matter. His love had never been gentle, and it never would be. When he kissed me that morning, it wasn't tenderness. It was possession. A silent vow written in fire and regret. His mouth was warm and relentless. And though I told myself I should push him away, I didn't. Because the truth, the terrible truth, was that I didn't know how anymore. Later, when he finally fell asleep beside me, I lay awake watching the faint light of dawn spread across the ceiling, thinking of Liam, of the man I used to love and the one who now held me. Somewhere out there, I knew a line had been crossed, one that couldn't be uncrossed, and I wasn't sure which one of us had crossed it first. Maybe it had been me, the moment I kissed a stranger to make someone else jealous. Maybe it had been Dante, the moment he decided that kiss meant something worth keeping. Or maybe it didn't matter anymore. Because now there was blood in the soil and roses on the windowsill, and I couldn't tell the difference between the two. And when I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in my mind like a prayer I no longer believed in. I started this. But he's the one who'll finish it. There's a moment, right before a storm breaks, when the air itself feels alive, when the sky hangs heavy and silent like it's holding its breath, and everything, every sound, every heartbeat, becomes sharper, louder, more dangerous. That's what the house felt like in the days that followed. Not peaceful, not calm, but charged, waiting, every shadow trembling with the promise of something terrible. Dante tried to act like everything was the same, that nothing had changed, but I could feel it in him. In the way his hands lingered too long on the glass before he drank. In the way his eyes flicked toward the windows like he was expecting something to appear out of the darkness. And I felt it in myself, too. The restless pulse beneath my skin. The ache in my chest that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with dread. I didn't ask about Liam again. I couldn't. The silence between us was safer than the truth. And every time I looked at Dante, I saw the reflection of everything I didn't want to know. But at night, when he slept beside me, his arm heavy across my waist, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of woman I had become. The kind who forgave, the kind who understood, or the kind who simply didn't want to lose him no matter what it cost. The guilt came in waves. It wasn't clean or simple. It tangled itself around the strange warmth I still felt when he looked at me, the pull that hadn't loosened even after everything he'd done. I hated that I needed him, that I found comfort in the same arms that could end a man's life without hesitation. And yet, when he touched me, when he whispered my name in that low, deliberate voice that could make a command sound like a confession, all I could think about was how far I'd already fallen, and how impossible it would be to climb back out. One night, I woke to the sound of voices. It was late, the hour when the world feels half dead, the kind of silence that makes even whispers sound too loud. I slipped from the bed and followed the sound down the hall, my bare feet silent on the marble floor. The voices were coming from Dante's office, the door slightly ajar, the low rumble of male conversation threading through the dark. "She's a liability," one of them said, a voice I didn't recognize, sharp, urgent. "You've already seen what happens when your weakness becomes public. People talk. They're starting to think. They can think whatever they want," Dante interrupted, his tone cool but dangerous. "No one touches her." "With respect, sir," the man pressed. "This isn't sustainable. You're losing focus. The police are watching. The other families are watching. If she's seen again—" There was a sound. Not loud, but final, like the click of a gun's safety being released. "Finish that sentence," Dante said, softly this time, and the silence that followed was enough to make my blood run cold. I stepped back before they could notice me, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. I didn't hear the rest. I didn't need to. The truth was already written in the air. I wasn't his salvation. I was his weakness, and in Dante Moretti's world, weaknesses didn't survive for long. I didn't sleep after that. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the sky turn gray over the sea, and tried to convince myself that what I'd heard didn't mean what it sounded like. But when he found me there in the morning, his face tired, his shirt still wrinkled from the night before, I saw the storm brewing in his eyes and knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. "Something's coming," I said quietly before he could speak. "Isn't it?" He exhaled slowly, then nodded. "Yes." "What kind of something?" "The kind I can't protect you from if you don't listen to me." His words landed like chains. "What does that mean?" "It means I need you to leave," he said, and my heart stuttered because I'd expected many things from him. Anger, control, obsession. But not that. "Leave?" I repeated. "You're the one who brought me here." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time he looked almost human, exhausted, haunted. "And now I'm the one who has to let you go." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You can't just decide that. You can't—" "I can," he said, his tone sharper now. "And I will. There's going to be a meeting tonight. Men who don't like me, men who think they can take what's mine. They've already sent threats. They'll use you if they can. I won't give them the chance." "Then take me with you," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me, and the expression on his face was one I'd never seen before. Not anger, not tenderness, but something closer to despair. "You think this is a love story," he said softly. "It's not. It's a warning." The words cut deeper than anything else he could have said. "Then what was it?" I asked. "What were we?" He didn't answer. He just turned away, his silence saying everything his pride wouldn't let him speak. By nightfall, the storm had arrived. The real one, crashing against the cliffs, thunder shaking the windows, lightning flashing across the sea like war drums. Dante's men moved through the house like shadows, their voices low, their movements deliberate. He gave me no details, only told me to stay in the east wing, to lock the door and not open it for anyone. I tried to obey. I really did. But fear and love have always been terrible companions, and the longer I sat there in the dark, the louder my thoughts became. Whispers of Liam, of blood and roses, of the way Dante had said they'll use you if they can. When the first gunshot echoed through the hall, I was already running. I didn't think, I just moved. Through corridors lit by flashes of lightning, the scent of gunpowder and rain thick in the air. I could hear shouting, the crash of glass, footsteps pounding against marble. I turned a corner just in time to see one of Dante's men fall, crimson blooming across his chest. I froze, the world tilting, and then a hand grabbed me from behind. "Found her!" a voice snarled. I screamed, twisted, tried to fight, but another figure appeared out of the shadows, taller, faster. and in one swift motion the man holding me dropped to the ground, a knife buried in his throat. Dante. He caught my arm before I could fall, his face pale, blood spattered across his cheek, his breathing hard. I told you to stay in your room, he said, his voice rough with anger and something that sounded like fear. I heard gunshots, I whispered. I know, he said, pulling me against him, his hand sliding to the back of my neck. And if you ever scare me like that again, I'll lock you somewhere no one can find you. Before I could respond, another gunshot cracked through the hall, and Dante shoved me to the ground, the impact knocking the breath from my chest. The sound of shattering glass followed, a flash of movement, and then everything happened at once. He fired back, twice, maybe 3 times. Someone screamed, the smell of smoke filled the air, and when I looked up I saw him stumble, just slightly, just enough for my heart to stop. Dante? He looked down, as if surprised, and that's when I saw it, the dark stain spreading across his shirt, blooming like a rose over his ribs. He swayed, caught himself against the wall, his eyes finding mine through the chaos. Ava, he said, his voice breaking. Stay. But the rest was lost in the sound of another explosion. The world splitting apart around us. Fire and rain and the sound of my own scream swallowed by the storm. And in that final moment, before the smoke closed in, I saw him fall. There are moments that split the soul cleanly in two, before and after, innocence and knowledge, love and loss. And when I saw Dante fall, it felt like the world itself broke along that fault line. The noise, the chaos, the smoke, all of it vanished into a terrible kind of silence, the kind that exists only at the edge of grief, where everything slows, and the heart forgets how to beat because it's waiting to know if there's still a reason to. I remember the sound my own voice made when I screamed his name. Raw, guttural, something torn straight from the center of me. And I remember the taste of blood and gunpowder in the air, the rain pounding against the shattered windows like it was trying to wash the world clean of what had just happened. I crawled to him through the wreckage, my hands trembling, my knees scraping against broken glass. And when I reached him, his eyes were open, unfocused but still alive. Still Dante. The same impossible man who had terrified me, consumed me, destroyed me, and somehow impossibly loved me. There was blood everywhere, on his shirt, on my hands, on the floor beneath him. Too much for one body to hold, and yet he was still trying to speak, his lips forming my name like it was the only word he had left. Don't, I whispered, pressing my hands to his wound even though I knew it was useless. Don't you dare leave me, do you hear me? You don't get to do that. He tried to smile, and even then, even bleeding, even dying, it was the same quiet, devastating curve of his mouth that had undone me from the beginning. You shouldn't have come, he murmured, his voice so faint I could barely hear it over the storm. I told you to stay. I'm not leaving you, I said, the words shaking, breaking, barely holding together. He exhaled slowly, a sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. Always so stubborn, he whispered, his fingers brushing my cheek, leaving streaks of red on my skin. I should have known I couldn't keep you safe from yourself. The gunfire had stopped by then. Somewhere in the distance I could hear footsteps retreating, voices shouting, the sound of engines starting. But none of it mattered. The world had shrunk to this one moment, this one heartbeat, this one impossible man bleeding out beneath my hands. Dante, I said, my voice breaking. Please just stay with me, please. He looked at me then, and for a second I thought maybe he would. That he would fight the way he always had. That he would find some impossible strength because he had always been the kind of man who refused to lose. But then his gaze softened, the fury fading, and what replaced it was something I hadn't seen before. Peace. I told you, he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. This was never a love story. It is to me, I said, my tears falling onto his chest, mixing with the rain and blood. For a moment he was silent. Then he smiled again, faintly, his hand falling to the ground beside him, his fingers brushing mine one last time. "Then make it a good one," he said, and his eyes closed. The sound that left my throat didn't feel human. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes, hours, maybe days. Time doesn't move the same way when your world stops turning. I remember the lights flashing through the windows, the sound of men shouting, hands pulling me away, but it all felt like it was happening to someone else. I remember being in a car, someone wrapping a blanket around me, someone asking questions I didn't answer. I remember the sea, black and endless, sliding past the window like a dream I'd already left behind. The days that followed came in fragments. Police, reports, questions I couldn't bear to answer. They said Dante's men had retaliated, that his empire had burned with him, that the Moretti name was finished. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't understand that men like Dante don't disappear, they just change shape. He lived on in whispers, in the fear that clung to the city's underbelly, in the silence that fell whenever someone said his name. They let me go eventually. I wasn't charged, just pitied. They told me I was lucky to be alive, but the word lucky felt obscene in my mouth, heavy with irony. I moved through those days like a ghost, haunted by the echo of his voice, the smell of smoke and roses, the feel of his hand on my skin. The world outside kept moving, oblivious, and I hated it for that, for the way it refused to stop, even for him. Weeks later, I found myself standing by the water again, at the edge of the cliffs that overlooked the sea near his estate. The house was gone now, or at least, it might as well have been. Stripped, abandoned, its windows shattered, its walls scarred by fire. The garden was overgrown, the roses wild and dark, their thorns glistening with rain. I picked one, pressed it between my palms, felt its edges bite into my skin until blood bloomed like a memory. He had once told me that everything beautiful bleeds. I think in the end he was right. I closed my eyes and let the wind tear through my hair, the scent of salt and storm clinging to me. I could almost hear his voice again, that low, velvet murmur, the one that always seemed to know exactly where to strike. "You kissed me first," he had said once, almost amused. "And I think you knew exactly what you were doing." Maybe I had. Maybe somewhere deep down, I had been waiting for someone like him all along, someone who saw through the fragile armor I wore, someone who could love me with the same ferocity I'd spent my life pretending I didn't need. He had been wrong about one thing, though. It was a love story. Just not the kind that ends neatly. Not the kind you can survive without losing pieces of yourself. When I finally opened my eyes, the sea stretched out before me, gray and endless, the horizon dissolving into mist. I took the rose from my hand and let it fall, watching as it tumbled through the air, a streak of red against the silver waves before the water swallowed it whole. They say time heals everything, but I don't believe that. Some things aren't meant to heal. Some loves aren't meant to fade. They linger, like ghosts, like curses, like the taste of smoke on the back of your tongue long after the fire is gone. As I turned to leave, I caught one last glimpse of the water below, and for just a second, in the corner of my vision, I thought I saw him. A shadow by the rocks, standing still against the storm, watching. It was impossible, of course. He was gone. He had to be. But the sight of it made something inside me twist. Something between hope and madness, because the thing about men like Dante Moretti is that death is never the end. I walked away without looking back. The sound of the sea chasing me like a heartbeat. Maybe it was grief, or guilt, or love. I no longer knew the difference. All I knew was that he had changed me, ruined me, remade me, and that no matter how far I went, a part of me would always belong to the moment I kissed a stranger in a bar and unknowingly called a monster home. And if I close my eyes now, if I stand very still and listen closely enough, I can still hear his voice somewhere in the dark, soft and dangerous and familiar, whispering the words that once terrified me but now feel like a prayer. You shouldn't have done that. And maybe he's right. But if I could go back, if I could undo it, I wouldn't. Because for a little while, for one impossible heartbeat of a life I barely recognize now, I was the queen beside the king. And even if the crown was made of thorns, it was still mine.